everybody, Kat Jackson here with the Hobby Hangout, bringing you another fantastic minis tutorial. Ro Annis is with us tonight. He's providing us some tips and tricks and some art and the wizardry of working with resin minis. And I believe you titled this Working with Resin Minis, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a great tutorial for everybody. I hope you enjoy it, and I'm going to turn it over to Ro now.
Thank you very much. Do I need to put myself up, or do I just appear no matter what's on my screen?
I've got you focused.
Okay, so it's what's on your screen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll introduce myself. I'm Ro Annis. Welcome to Working with Resin, or I had a steel bolt put through my head, because really the title for this is pretty terrible. I'd rather, and that was why I put up this picture here, because it's a lot more interesting, if it'll actually come up. Nope, I guess not. Oh, there we go. So instead, I'd like to call this cute owl wearing a bowler hat, which is probably a lot more interesting than working with resin. Certainly a better title. But let's go back, and before we get started here, oops, I got to figure out how to unshare this. Okay, I think I'm back. A few things before we get started. I thought I would let everybody know that there's going to be a quiz at the end, and whoever can answer the questions of the quiz best. Right now we have 2 people. Maybe we'll have some more people as we get a little further into this. Will win a fantastic prize, which I'm going to show you here if I can get my camera changed. And here we go. I'll show everybody what the. So there we go. I think, yeah. So I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
I'll get my screen up.
Very clear.
Okay. Hang on, let me get rid of my toolbar here. Okay. What you're looking at is a die-struck pin from the former Soviet Union. This pin was made in 1963, and it celebrates the first woman in space, Valentina Tereshkova. And actually, she was launched into space on June 16th, 1963. So at the end of this, whoever can get the questions, most of the questions right that I have, I will mail them the pin once they post their address, their phone number, and their social security number on a Facebook thread.
No.
So anyway, now let's get started. And actually, even before we, my camera's not up, is it? No. Hang on. Let me do this here. I'm still kind of fumbling around here with the technology a little bit. There we go. The one before we even do that, I wanted to do even one more sidetrack before I get into the resin part of this. And I'm always kind of fooling around with things to do, and I kind of came across this by accident. You guys are probably use an airbrush. A lot of you probably use an airbrush. So I'll pull my airbrush out here. Here's my airbrush. And I mix all my paint in paper cups. So basically I squeeze them into these cups, put whatever it is I'm going to use in here, and do it that way. And what I found is the problem is because I'm using, I gotta hold this so I can see it here, using so little paint, it's hard to mix. It's just a problem. It's just hard to get down there and mix it. So I basically said, you know what, I'm just going to cut the top of this cup off. So I cut the top off, like so, which, you know, I guess that's obvious, right? But now, because this cup is shallow at one end, I can mix that paint because I can actually get down to it. But there was another really great benefit of basically, you'll notice I cut it at an angle, is that if you have your airbrush, typically what you're doing, I got to make this so you can see it. Boy, this is really, here we go. Typically what you're doing is you're trying to pour that paint right down into the throat of this thing. This little thing actually acts as like a flower pot spigot, and you can pour that paint right down into the hole there and not splash it all over the top here because it's so long and so narrow. So it's just a stupid little thing that makes airbrushing a little bit more easy. Okay, so enough of that. Let's talk about the first bit of resin. Get my information out here. So what's up with resin anyway? I think that's the real question. I want to talk about the pros and cons just really quickly first of why you would even consider a resin miniature. And I have a bunch of resin miniatures here. I'll show you one, or I'll hold one up. So here's a resin miniature. This is well, you can't really see that. This is an Axe Faction miniature that I purchased. And the pros of something like this, I don't know if you can see this, but this is a woman holding a snake. And it's not for any particular game. It's not an army miniature or anything like that. So one of the pros of buying a resin miniature right off the bat is unusual subject matter. So here's a pretty unusual subject matter that you probably, well, maybe in Malifaux you would find something like this, but it's still kind of an unusual piece. And the reason you see unusual subject matter typically with resin miniatures is because unlike metal miniatures and plastic miniatures, you can make this in your garage or your basement. So if you can sculpt, you can make a RTV mold and you can pour resin in it, and you can make this without having to have a whole army of people behind you to deal with all the industrial stuff that goes along with it. Now another advantage to resin miniatures is you get some amazing detail. If you look at close up on some of these things, the detail on them actually is so fine and so amazing, you would even wonder how you're even going to paint it sometimes. And I know that with plastic miniatures you can get some pretty amazing details too, but with resin it's pretty amazing what you can find if you've ever really looked at them. Here, I'll give you a shot of this miniature so you kind of see what I'm talking about here. So the detail on this thing is pretty, all the little dangly bits that are hanging off there. See, now I'm having trouble getting this thing focused, but you can see here on her, as part of it's the light, on her thigh right there, there's like a bunch of bangles and stuff that's hanging off there that are just, I'm not even sure how you would paint those things. So anyway, you get some amazing detail. Another advantage to resin miniatures are resin's actually quite easy to work with. It's easy to sand, it's easy to cut. It has a whole bunch of qualities that are just make it, it's lightweight, glues to itself, a lot of great things about resin miniatures in terms of that. It's also very trendy, so if you want to be like really hip and really cool and show the other guys that you're like totally on top of things, you got to have some cool resin miniatures. Okay, so let's talk about the downside. There is a downside. There are some safety issues, which I will go over very briefly. You're probably aware of that, but we'll go over that. Resin miniatures can be extraordinarily brittle, which can be a problem. A metal miniature you can work on like a horseshoe, you can bang on it, and you can do all sorts of stuff. You don't have to worry about breaking something off of it. A resin miniature you have to be careful because it's going to be a lot more brittle.
Ro, can I ask you a question?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm sure this may appeal to some people. How can you tell the difference between a resin and a plastic model?
Well, if typically a plastic model, you'll be able to tell right away because it'll be on a sprue, probably, unless it's been removed from the sprue. And a plastic model, I mean, you can test a plastic model by putting solvent on it, for example. So if you're unsure and if it melts a little bit, I mean, like on the base, that would be another way. But usually the giveaway is like on a resin model here. You see the sprue on the bottom that they used to cast it with. It's uneven. You can see where they glued the little air vents and stuff on there. That's usually a dead giveaway right there. So that's another giveaway. Now, if you have two models that have been totally cleaned up and totally off the sprues, then the way to tell a plastic one is you look at the draft angles on it. So you know, it would come out of a mold. It would come out of a mold in a certain way where there wouldn't be undercuts. So this model has a lot of undercuts on it that you couldn't do in plastic. But usually the sprue will give it away right away. So another disadvantage of, and by the way, jump in anytime with any questions. So because in that way it won't just be me droning on and on. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. That was great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. The other disadvantage to resin is it can be very expensive. So, you know, if this was a metal model from Reaper, this would be, you know, $5, $6, $7 at the most. You know, from Axe Faction, this is a $20 or more model, depending on where you're going to get it from. And, you know, the more collectible that model is, the harder it is to get, the more desirable it is, the more expensive it's going to be. You know, so if you look at, you know, I've been buying Kingdom Death resin models. You know, they're very expensive. So you just have to suck it up and buy it if you want them. You know, that's really all there is to it. And then the last thing I can think about in terms of resin models, if you have a big resin model, one disadvantage is they can wilt over time because resin is kind of like stained glass in that it can, the heat and everything can kind of bend it over time. So if it's heavy and it's something heavy, it can kind of start to tilt and fall over. So you know, a little tiny model like this is not going to wilt. But if you had like a big robot or something where there was a big weight on top and it had thin legs, you know, in 5 or 10 years it might wilt. Actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, I have an X-wing sitting behind me that's made out of resin, and if you look at all of the ones that were made for collectors, because the wings are all resin, they're all wilted. The wings tend to sag over time because of the weight on them, so they tend to be a little droopy. And even the ILM original X-wings, they have droopy wings because they were resin, and that's what resin does over time. So there's your pros and cons. The next thing we're going to talk about is safety. So there's a lot of talk about, you know, what to do with resin and what not to do. The first thing I can tell you is basically what you want to do with resin is you don't want to inhale the dust. That's really the main thing. And so what that really means is if you have a resin model and it has a sprue on it, and I'm going to switch cameras here again and try to keep this all running smoothly. So here we have a Kingdom Death model of, I don't know what this thing is. It's one of the something or another's. It's a thing. And you can see on the bottom of this, you can tell this is a resin model right away because it has a non-uniform sprue on the bottom. So that's like a giveaway right away that this is a kit. I don't want to grind this off, in other words, with a grinding wheel, because the grinding wheel essentially, it's a messy way to grind it off, and I don't mind grinding things, but the heat from the grinding wheel will reactivate the toxic chemicals in the resin, and that's really the heat, high heat on resin, the mercuries and stuff in it kind of come back to life. So what you really want to do with something like this, and we talked about this in the other episode, is you want to take any sort of tool like this, like these front end nippers, and you want to clip, well, this is really a thick piece, but basically you want to clip as much of this off as possible and not introduce any heat to it. That's really your best, absolute best thing. And you could take a, let me see if I can find it here, a saw. So here's a razor saw that fits in a X-Acto blade. Basically, you can take this thing and just saw this thing off. You know, you don't have to press hard. You just, you know, it'll take a little bit, but it's not introducing a lot of heat to this thing, and that's the best thing, is to chunk off as much of the resin as you can. At some point, you might have to do some grinding. It's okay to do a little bit of grinding, but basically try to avoid it as much as you can. So slice it, cut it, chop it, whatever you can do. That is a good thing for safety. The other thing to keep in mind is some people are very allergic to resin, and resin in this form is inert pretty much, so it's not what you have to worry about as much. I work with some people who are very allergic to resin, especially if you grind it, because that's what really makes it come back to life again as something that's toxic. And I can say from working with them is, if you're working with resin, and it's very rare, and especially these little pieces like this, I mean, at work we tend to work with big pieces of resin and with some more toxic stuff. But if you get a rash, let's say you're working and on your arm, all of a sudden you notice you have a rash, there's a good chance you might be allergic to resin. So just pay attention and see if you're reacting to it. And like I say, it's usually like a skin rash is what you see right away. And then stop working with that resin. That's the best thing you can do at that point, and see what happens. I mean, I worked with a guy who was allergic to Procast, and when people would grind it, if he was around, there was a chance that we would have to call 911 because he had a very strong allergic reaction, and so we had to tell everybody in the shop, don't grind this stuff. So there's some other rules about resin. No eating, no licking, no rubbing in your eyes. Don't make eating utensils out of it. Don't climb up on a 4-story block of resin and jump off. Never text while driving a big chunk of resin. And of course, I hope don't eat cereal made out of resin. So those are all things that you should probably avoid. At least probably a good idea. Okay, so let's move on to the next part. Let's talk about buying resin kits. I have bought dozens and dozens of resin kits, and not so much miniatures. I bought a lot of miniature resin kits, but I bought a lot of ships and tanks and airplanes and bigger figures. And I have some rules about buying resin kits. Oh, okay, no, we'll do this first. We'll do the rules. So there are 3 rules. Rule number 1, don't buy it unless you can see it. And the reason for that is because resin kits are usually made in people's garages, you want to see whether it has lots of air bubbles in it, whether it's straight. You need to see this thing. And even if they post a picture of it on the internet, chances are they're posting a really nice picture of their best sample. So hold it in your hands, take a look at it, and see what you're buying, you know. So that's the first rule. Rule number 2, if you can't see it, buy it from somebody you trust. So there are people out there who go through a lot of trouble to make sure that their resin kits are as good as they can make them. So buy them from them, or if you've bought something from them before, and you feel comfortable, then buy another one from them, because chances are you're going to be spending more money than for a regular kit. And then rule number 3, if none of the above, the person who's selling you the kit, ask them, can I return this kit for my money? And depending on the answer that you get, that'll tell you right away whether or not they believe in their kits. If they say, absolutely, send the kit back to me, no problem, I'll give you your money back, no questions asked, then feel good about that, because then that means that they feel comfortable that what they're selling you, you probably won't return. If they balk at that, don't buy it, because that means that they know they're making crud and probably, and you're going to return it. So those are the 3 rules for buying resin. This is just a little bit of trivia about buying resin kits that I like. I like to know when I'm one of the reasons why I like to buy resin kits is I like to know whether that person is a smoker or has pets. And the reason I say that is because, oh, my graphic is gone, is because anytime you buy, oh, there it is, anytime you buy a resin kit and you open up that box for the first time, especially if you've never done this before, you will know right away whether that person is a smoker or has pets. And it's interesting because I bought these from Axe Faction, and I found a couple of dog hairs, and I knew right away that he had a dog and that he had cast these at home. And sure enough, he has a dog because I have a couple of his dog hairs. And of course, some people you want to know whether or not their pets actually smoke. So, and in some cases, you actually can learn that. Okay. So that's buying resin kits. Let's get into some of the nitty-gritty of actually looking at the resin kits to do and actually dealing with the flaws, the pinholes, the things that are missing, and all that sort of stuff. Because when you buy a resin kit, you're going to get some of that, and hopefully the amount of that you get is pretty minimal. So the first rule is, there's another rule. Let's see if I can find here what we're talking about. Is when you get a resin kit, you're typically going to get it in a little bag like this, hopefully. And in this little bag is going to be all sorts of little bits of pieces of crud at the bottom. You can see there's little bits of crud. So your first inclination is, after getting this kit, you're going to take this thing and you're going to dump the pieces out, and you're going to take all that little crud and you're going to throw it in the garbage can. Don't do that. That's a big mistake, because chances are one of these little pieces at the bottom broke off of something in here, and you won't realize it until you're working on it, and you'll be like, oh, the tooth is missing. Where's the tooth? Where's the horn? Where's that finger? So, as an example, and this has always been the case for me. I even if I take this thing out of the bags, I'll save the bags with the little bits of crud in it and put them somewhere, because chances are that little piece that I need is in that bag, and it's so much easier to glue that little piece on than try to fabricate it. So you'll notice here, see that guy's head? He has these really awesome horns that coming out of there. Well, you see one of the tips of the horns is gone. Where did it go? Well, it is in this bag. And the thing is you might not realize it. Hang on, I'll see if I can. There it is. There's the tip of the horn right there. So instead of having to build that horn from scratch, which sucks, I will just take and glue that horn right back on there. Now this is kind of a graphic example. Sometimes it'll be something really small or a little edge piece or something like that, and that's why you just save everything until the model's done, because the bag doesn't take up any space, and so it's not really a big deal. The other nice thing is resin really glues well to itself, so it'll go on there and it'll really stick. So that's the first thing you should do. So let's talk about pinholes. Let me find my example for pinholes. A pinhole is basically a really teeny tiny little hole. Sometimes there's one, sometimes there's a whole bunch of them, and they're really hard to fill because they're so darn small. And so here's a Kingdom Death model, resin model, that has a pinhole on it, which I have to find. And trying to push putty or something into one of these pinholes is hard, mostly because there's air in that pinhole, and the material that you're trying to push in there just doesn't want to go in there because of the air, believe it or not. Okay, let me find it. I know there's a pinhole on here because I saw it. There it is. Is that it? No. Where is it? There it is. I'm sorry. Okay. The pinhole's right here in her arm. Let's see if I can zero in on that. See it right there? There's a little tiny hole. And that hole is really small because you can see my thumb. You know, I should sell advertising space on my thumb. That would be really cool. Anyway, there's a little tiny hole right there. Filling that with putty or epoxy or something like that, that's madness. It's just not a very fun thing to do. And some models will have a lot of pinholes on them. And pinholes exist for a lot of different reasons. So here's another reason. Let's see if I can. I got to get my lenses on here so you can see what's going on. And you notice that this model has some sprues on it. These are vents for air to get out of this thing, because this thing was cast. I'm not sure how it was cast. It was cast like this, so that was a way for the air to get out of this thing. These sprues. I love round sprues, when they put round sprues on things, because that sprue is going to enable me to fill that pinhole. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that little sprue off of there, and I'm going to save it, because I'm a wacko. Find the right tool here. So I'm going to save this thing. I don't know if you can see that or not. So now we got this little sprue. I'm going to take this sprue now, and I'm going to measure it, which is even a little more crazy. So I'm going to take my calipers here, and I'm going to figure out just how big this sprue is. And this sprue is 21 thousandths approximately. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my drill bits, and actually I think the one that's in here is a 21, oddly enough. It is. So I'm going to take a 21 thousandths drill bit, and I'm going to take this fine, expensive model, and I'm going to wreck it by basically putting my drill right into that pinhole, and I'm going to drill it out, just like that. Now I've made an even bigger hole in her arm. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this sprue, which is made out of exactly the same material, and I'm going to see if I can get it in there. And right now it doesn't fit, which is good. That's actually what I want. Because I want it to be just a little tighter than the a little bit hole. So now I'm going to take a file here. I don't know if you can see that. I'm trying to switch between all my lenses here, which is crazy. I'm going to take a file, and I'm just going to kind of worry this thing down a little bit so that it basically has a slight taper to it. Because the thing about resin is it glues to itself really, really well. So that's one of the advantages that we want to take advantage of is that. I got to get some glue here. So now, I don't know if you guys can see that. I'll try to make it so you can see it. I'm going to take my glue. I'm going to put it on here. It's pretty exciting stuff. I'm going to take my tweezers and get the right end of this thing, hopefully, like so. This is the thick glue. I like using the thick stuff. It gives me a little more working time. Plus, I can see it on the part, so I can actually see what's going on. I don't know if you can see that. I'll try to make it so you can see it. And let's get it to where the hole is. There we go. And basically, I'm going to shove this in there. Like so. Like so. Come on, camera. There we go. Like so. So now she has this big stick sticking out of her arm, but the hole is completely filled with exactly the same material. So now I can take this little blade here and I can cut this off of there. And again, I'm not looking at the camera right now, but you'll have to take my word for it. I'll hold this up here so that you can see it hopefully as good as possible. I don't know if you can see that, but that hole no longer exists. And because the resin is slightly malleable, which is good and that's why I made it cone shape. When you force it in there, when I go over that with a little bit of sandpaper or something, you will not be able to tell that was ever there, ever. And that is always an issue filling stuff, is whatever you're filling, if it's harder or softer than the big piece, when you go to sand it, you'll either get a bump or a divot. But because this is all exactly the same material, it will literally it will have never existed. And that is why when you're looking at your model, the other thing you want to save is, let me try to get this out here so you can see it. So you can see all this stuff here is on a sprue. Save all those sprue bits, because all of these sprue bits here will end up becoming pieces that you can fix your model with, because they're made out of exactly the same material. And like I say, a guy who uses round sprues, you have to love that, because that round sprue will match a drill bit, which means that you can drill into your model and shove that thing in there and you will be good to go. So that's a pinhole. Let's talk about something that's just missing. So I have another model here, and this is going to be interesting. Some of this I haven't practiced yet, so it's going to be, might even be a little nerve-wracking, who knows. We'll give it a shot. So here's a cape from another figure, and this is a resin cape. Let's imagine for a moment that this cape was damaged, and it's very common for like little resin stuff like this to be have something missing from it. So let's just say for a moment, let's just say for a moment that it had a big chunk out of it. Oh my God, I wrecked it. I went from $40 kit to nothing, just like that. Well, what you can do, and this could be anywhere. This could be on a tip right here where the cape is. It doesn't matter. And on a big flat part like this, it's easier. Basically, what we're going to do, get my camera here set up. And this concept will work, in a lot of different ways. I'm going to take my flat blade here, and I'm going to chop this out and make a little wedge-shaped cut. I don't know if you guys can see that. I got to look at what I'm doing here. So now I basically took a total wedge out of this thing, just like that. It's not focusing perfectly, but you get the idea. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into my model and hope. Maybe I cut out too big of a piece. So here's the sprue to this model. I'm going to take a section. Notice I'm cutting this instead of grinding it. So here's a little chunk of sprue, waste product. And this sprue is just a hair bit too small. I'm gonna take this sprue and basically glue it right there, just like that. Now all I have to do is make sure that this edge right here is flat, and that the piece I'm gluing in also is flat. Nothing else matters except where this is gluing in. That's all that matters right now. So I'm going to take, I guess I'm going to go through this here a little bit. I take a file and file it. Pretty exciting stuff. And I'm going to take a sanding block like so, and I'm going to make sure that one side of this is flat. And another side of it is flat, which I'll do over here. Okay. So now we have this wonderfully flat piece. And now I'm going to take and dip it in a little of this thick glue sitting over here. And I'm gonna hold this up so hopefully you can see it. There we go. And I'm basically going to shove it in there. Just like that. Now through this so that you guys can kind of see. Basically, what I've done is I've added, come on camera, added a piece to this. There we go, kind of. And you can see, because the resin is slightly movable, what's going to happen is there's going to be no gaps in that piece. And then basically what I can do now, and because this is super glue, I can just go to town and totally reshape this whole piece. So I can take my nippers and my blade here, cut this off. See, it's starting to look like a cape already. I can take a blade like so, and I can start to carve this. I can carve this down and then I can sand it. I can put this groove back in here. You will never be able to tell that this piece was ever gone because it was resin. And this is also true of typically, let me see if I can find here. You're like looking at like one of these little edges here. A lot of times these little thin edges will be broken off. You can do exactly the same thing, totally reshape them yourself. Now, Kat, you had mentioned something about plastic. This works with plastic really well too, because the plastic will melt. It's malleable. Now with metal, the metal doesn't glue as well to itself as the resin in the plastic does. By the way, welcome, Lay. But with resin and plastic, you can do this. Now with plastic, you're never going to have a pinhole, but you will have stuff that gets broken off. And you'll notice on this kit too, right here, here's some bubbles that are right under the surface. And these are really small, and you'd have to decide what to do with these things. Typically, you can leave them alone, but they can be an issue sometimes. It looks like 2 of them are opened up here. So anyway, that's a nice thing that you can do with resin, is putting a wedge in there. And actually, what I'd like to show is there's a little bit of methodology behind how this works. Let's see if I can get my camera here to focus on this. And the methodology is that what you want to do is, if this is your edge and your chunk that's missing, you want to cut out something that's not that has an angle to it, like that, so that whatever it is you're trying to fit in, you'll be able to fit into this angle. And it's the same with, sometimes when you're cutting something out, you actually want to cut it so that it's like that, and then the thing that you're cutting, you can match up this edge to it and jam it in there like a piece of cheese. The other thing you can do too is that sometimes you'll have a part and there'll be some sort of imperfection, let's say. Literally, you can drill through this and create a hole. And the nice thing about this hole is you know what size it is, and then you can just take a resin bit of something or another and make it that size and push it in there. Okay, let's talk about let's talk about mold seams. And this is an issue with any kit. Here's a resin figure that I got this is something I bought from Greece, and no problem. And the issue that I have with this figure, and this is something you want to watch, is that this figure is molded in the classic resin color, which is off-white or yellowish tan or something like that. And with a figure like this, it's impossible to see any detail on it. And a lot of guys like to cast things in this color. First of all, it's easy because this is the natural color of the resin, but seeing what's going on with this thing is very difficult. And so what you're going to hope to see is something like this. This figure, from the same guy actually, this figure is cast in gray, and gray is more like a primer coat. So that means it's going to be so much easier to look at this thing and see if it has any flaws or imperfections on it. So let's see if we can point some of those out. In the biggest places for flaws and imperfections are going to be wherever the registration is, where you open the mold up. And I'm going to try to get this so that we can see it here. I got to. There we go. Oops. So let's. There we are. So right here, I don't know if this is going to be visible or not. Doesn't look like I can get the camera to see it. A little bit. Right along here is where the registration is, and it was pretty good, but there's a line right along here. And the only way we're really going to get rid of this thing, well, there's a number of different ways we can get rid of it. One of them is the tried and true, take your X-Acto blade and scrape it, which works. Ooh, there, you can actually see it there. But what we're going to do is we're going to take a Sharpie, and again, this works for anything. Basically, I'm going to mark this line because it is so hard to see. So now I've marked that line. Hopefully you can see it too. There you go. There's a Sharpie line there where that registration line is. And now, and I'll try to do this so you can see it. You can take your blade and as you scrape, you'll be able to see where the material is coming off. Hang on a second. You're going to have to do yourself. Just stay up. I'll be up in a little while. So basically that Sharpie that's on there, first of all, it's letting you know much easier. I mean, I was having a hard time finding that registration line, but now I know where it's at. But also, as I scrape, what's going to happen is it will become more apparent where the high spots and the low spots are on here. Actually, you can see on the shin here, right there, that there's still a spot that's low because there's still Sharpie in there. So what you're going to do is you're going to just keep worrying this down until you get to no Sharpie. Is essentially what you're trying to get to. Now the other way you can do it is you can cheat a little bit, like I showed earlier, and you can take your Dremel tool with some steel wool in it, like I've got here, and we can take, just like on metal, this will work on resin. You just have to be a little bit more diligent to not press quite too hard because the resin is a little softer. And I'm gonna try to make this so you can see it. We're just basically gonna polish this, and this is working very well actually. I just don't know if you can see it. A really light touch, and then basically, let's see if you can see that, where that seam line was, which is there we go. I basically polished it right off of there, and you can see the black on the leg that was there before. There's a little hint of it right there, but I can take and I can go back and I can just take that steel wool in the Dremel, and I can just lightly polish that until it's completely gone. So that's what I recommend for cleaning up the mold lines on these. And obviously the mold line is going to follow around the figure here. So once you find it, just trace it around and take your Sharpie or a really good lead pencil that's really soft and mark it so that you can see it. So I think we're getting close to the end here. Actually, we're I think we are actually at the end, which is good because that took about an hour. So I think it's time for the quiz. So, and actually,
might be just me.
Huh?
Might just be me.
Well, it looks like Caleb's there too. Um, so let's see if we can give away a piece of Cold War Soviet history. I showed a picture of, so typically what I do is I ask 3 questions. So I showed a picture of an animal that was doing something that it shouldn't have been doing. What was it doing?
Showed a picture of an animal doing something it shouldn't be doing.
It was
An
bad.
owl wearing a hat?
That's not bad for an owl.
Oh, I
Is it?
must have missed it. No, that wouldn't be bad.
It related to if you buy a kit, you're trying to figure out whether somebody has a bad habit or whether they have animal companions.
Oh, it was a cat smoking.
There you go. So there's 1 right. We just have 2 more to go. This is going to be a tough one. What was the name of the first woman in space?
Oh, she's Russian. I don't know her name though.
Oh, you know what? I can change the camera view here. There we go. Well,
Do you know
maybe you
that
can
bit
get
of trivia history, Caleb?
He's like, no, I'm sorry. Well, I'm gonna have to award it next time. It looks like. So next time everybody will know that they'll have to
take notes.
All 2 of you will have to remember to pay a little bit more attention to trivia. So hopefully hopefully that's useful for dealing with resin miniatures. A lot of the same rules apply for attaching into bases and everything as for metal miniatures. I kind of wanted to highlight some of the unique things that you can find with a resin miniature.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Real quick, can I see the Dremel tip with the steel wool on it? And maybe you showed that earlier. When you turned it on, it was already spinning. So I wanted to see how the steel wool is on there. Is that an actual purchasable piece, or do you just have the steel wool wrapped around one of the stones?
Let me change my camera here so that I can see what's going on here. So there it is, and this is a pretty sophisticated arrangement, as you'll see here in a moment. And basically what this is a Q-tip that has been cut like that. And then what you do is put this in here.
Oh, you just grab a little steel wool and spin it on.
And then, actually, you know what? I did this incorrectly. You need just a little bit of bite. So what you do is you take this thing and try to take everything off of it. You leave just a little bit, and it has just a little bit of grab to it.
Okay.
And then basically I can take and cut this off. The longer it is, the more it's going to flex. So there's kind of an optimal length before it gets all bendy on you.
Mm-hmm.
That's a real technical terms, I know. And basically you put that in your Dremel tool. And then you take some steel wool, which is here, and basically you pull it off like cotton candy. It tastes really good too. And you roll it on in the opposite direction. So you basically just get it started on here. And then what's going to happen is as you're using it, it basically comes off and wears off.
Right.
So you just keep replenishing. And that's really all there is to it. Now I didn't put a lot on here. If you've got an area of a body that's really hard to reach, if you put on more, so let's say I put on a nice, it's something you have to experiment with a little bit, but if I put on a lot, kind of like this, is what will happen is because there's a lot on there, let's see if I can show it really quickly. It'll deform to fit the area, which is really useful. So let's say I have a figure like this and I want to do this armpit here.
Mm-hmm.
If I'll try to make this so you can see it, obviously. What will happen is, see how it's deforming?
Right.
It wants to be that shape.
Uh-huh.
So that really works well because getting your knife down in there to do all that is not very much fun, but you can kind of hog it out with your knife a little bit, and then basically the steel wool will just make that shape for you.
Right.
And so it enables you to polish areas that you normally couldn't reach, which is pretty cool actually. And again, it's one of those things you can just play around with it and you'll get a feel for how it works. Now the other thing that I've done too is you'll notice that this particular tip here is pointed slightly. So basically I took a sanding block, if I can find one here, and I wanted to be able to get into kind of a little bit of a tighter space. So basically you can take your sanding block and sand this down, to whatever shape you want. Basically, you can create your own tools,
Yeah.
and make that however you want to make it, because it'll with a pointed tip, it'll act a little differently than with a blunt tip on it. That's really all there is to it. And this is a quadruple odd, so this is the 4-0
Mm-hmm.
steel wool. And actually, it's interesting because somebody asked me where this came from, and I last time I didn't remember, but then it came to me where this idea came from. And when I first started model building, I was building science fiction replicas of spaceships, specifically Star Wars models. And I did a lot of research on how they built their models. And they were not very kind to their models. And that's why they turned out so well, because they were not afraid to beat the crap out of them. And one of the things that they would do is after they got done painting the models, they would take steel wool and steel wool the whole model. And what that would do is it would break the finish on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that to my model, and then I realized that I could do this to airplanes. And so if you have a World War II fighter, you can take steel wool and you can just lightly brush it in the direction of the airflow, and it gives you this unbelievable finish. It's like a satin. It's really hard to describe, but it's a great finish.
I'm gonna have to try that. I'm working on a project right now with a flyer, with aircraft. I'm gonna have to try that because it'll give you a finish, but it'll be in the direction of movement of friction.
Correct.
Fantastic idea.
So what I recommend is, but try it on a scrap piece first. You know what I mean?
Right.
In you can be very aggressive or you can be very light, but basically it makes that paint look the way it should on an airplane, especially. It's a great. So anyway, then what happened is that evolved to this Dremel thing, and I'm not even sure where that jump came from, but it just but that was the progression, I guess.
Well, I just love the idea of being able to clean those mold lines without deforming the surface, because that steel wool is just going to grab that edge. It's not really going to grab the surface because it's not super abrasive, but it's just abrasive enough to grab that edge. Do you think that would work with? You think that would work with misalignments in the mold where you get mold shift?
I think so. It depends. You believe it? I have a phone down here. Hang on a second. Hello? Hey, let me give you a call back, okay? Okay, thanks. That's ridiculous. I never get phone calls. It depends on how big that misalignment is. If that misalignment's really big, then that's going to be hard. But if it's not, or the misregistration, then you can do it. You know what I mean? But that's going to be true no matter what.
I'm gonna have to play with that a lot more.
The other thing that's actually pretty important is using the Q-tip paper that's wrapped. It's flexible, but not too. You know what I mean? It has the right kind of flexibility you need so that you can do that. I don't think it'll work with a piece of steel, or you know what I mean. It has to be something that it will give, but not give too much.
Right.
So, but anyway, it's something for me that has worked really well, and the only complaint I have about it is the mess. When you get done, you have, well, you can see here, I have shavings of steel wool, and this basically I just taped a magnet to a stick so I can kind of pick them all up. Sometimes one of these little pieces will get into your painting, so you just have to be pretty diligent that when you do it, that when you get done, you really hose the area down,
Yeah.
But there are worse things, I guess.
Fantastic. So far, both episodes, I've been doing this for a little while, and I've picked up some really cool little tips that I never even knew of. So fantastic so far. I'm really enjoying these.
It's quiet.
It is quiet. You've had there's viewers. They're not in the Hangout. They're viewing from outside.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that I realize that one of the fun things that I like about modeling is coming up with ways to solve issues. That I really get a lot of enjoyment out of that. That's kind of like a puzzle to me. And I have a lot of other things that I've kind of solved, and I think it would be interesting to maybe touch on that sometime, and maybe just go through and do like a grab bag of, hey, look, you can make something like this, because you never know, like, when something like that will be really useful. But we'll see.
That was another great session. Thanks so much, Ro.
Oh, no problem.
Okay. If you're at your end, they'll probably stop the broadcast now.
I think so. We put enough bricks to sleep.
All right.